Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host, and we're glad to see you back. If you haven't done so and you wouldn't mind, would you please go and subscribe to the podcast? It's on 30 different channels, including Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, all of your favorites. And while you're there, go ahead and check out the website, globalinvestoragent.com. So these are agents that we train in U.S. and Canada too, by the way, to serve us investors. They're not your typical agent who help us buy and sell our own homes. They can do that, but they're specifically trained and have resources to help you and I make great decisions when it comes to investing. So go get yourself one of those guys because it doesn't cost you a dime. So in any case, back to the show here. We got a great guest today, Terrie Schauer, all the way from beautiful Montreal. And Terrie, first off, welcome aboard. Thank you so much for spending your valuable, precious time doing this.
Thanks for having me on the show, Gary.
Absolutely. Hey, if you wouldn't mind, I know we were chatting a little bit about Montreal and the fact that I didn't live there, but I used to live in Ontario, just west of Toronto, and it's I really love it up there. For people who haven't been there, I highly encourage you. The border restrictions are lifted. You can go over and visit and have fun. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us how a little bit of background. How did you get there, and how did you get into this part of your business where you help landlords understand the mindfulness of being a good, successful landlord?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a Montreal native. My parents emigrated here from, my dad's from Austria, my mom's from South Africa, and they actually met here. So I grew up in Montreal. And then I left, I went away to study. I lived in Toronto, Vancouver, Britain, France. But basically, like throughout that period, when I was a student, I managed properties, and I managed student properties that I lived in. And I did that up until I was doing my PhD in the end. And I'd been managing properties at that point for, 5-6 years. Mm-hmm. And then I went to see Dad and said, Dad, okay, I'm ready to do this for profit. Can you co-sign a mortgage and lend me a down payment? And I'm going to go set up a student residence, basically. Cool. So I bought a house in like the worst part of Montreal at that time, a triplex, and then set it up as room rentals for foreign students before Airbnb was cool, and created kind of like a community for people who were coming from out of town to feel like they could integrate something. And so it ended up being a great business model. And I kind of did that in parallel to my studies for a while. And then when I got done with my PhD, there was a bit of a fork in the road where I had to decide, am I going to take the academic route and become a prof, or am I going to focus full-time on real estate? And at that point, I just felt like my values really weren't aligned terribly well with what was going on in academia. Yeah, I felt like, there was a very left-leaning kind of a politically correct thing going on. And because those weren't necessarily my opinions, I was really had a lot of headwinds. And so I was like, okay, no, I think I'm going to be better served in a business context where I can feel like I can grow. And then one day I'm going to be able to, work with ideas in that business context where I'm not constrained by this kind of ideological straitjacket of what academia has become. Yeah. I mean, we can sort of go back there a little bit later on. But then one of the other things that kind of ran parallel to this was I had a career as an athlete. I was a semi-pro kickboxer for some years, and now I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And what happened through that is that I really, started bumping up against my own limitations. Mm-hmm. And as I wanted to kind of move up the ranks and get to real elite level in my sport, I realized that it was my mental thing that was a problem. Like physical performance is one thing, but if you have the physical talent to be somewhere, unless you align yourself mentally, especially I think in any sport, but especially in combat sport, where there's a lot of fear and emotions to manage, a lot of discipline, you're not going to make it unless you're very mentally aligned. And then I came in contact with the ideas of, mindfulness, it comes from Buddhism, but it's also sort of dovetails with this warriorship idea that there was this way that the ancient samurai used to train their mind, and that then is called warriorship, but it's also kind of blended with mindfulness. And I came in contact with those ideas, and it really allowed me to align myself mentally and then use those tools to be able to succeed at what I did. And so as my real estate journey continued, I ended up then first opening a property management company, and then now doing more like sort of joint ventures and taking my investment stuff to the next level. But that like really what was able to allow me to make those transitions every time, because every time you're leveling up, it's unfamiliar, it's unknown, and you have to apply a methodology to be able to kind of get to the next level. That mindfulness stuff really helped me kind of move up the ranks in whatever I was trying to do. And then that turned into writing, and I have a podcast as well, but like the idea is that those ideas were so important and great for me that I want everybody to be able to profit from them. So,
yeah, well, that's really awesome. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I understand exactly what you're saying about academia, particularly at the university level. My former wife is a professor at Western Ontario University, and she represents Canada on the UN for food and agriculture. But she was an outcast because it's strictly very rigid, and while she's a very disciplined person, she was an entrepreneur at heart, and that's what how we first met was through a conference. And so you're correct that if you're an entrepreneur, by default, you fall within the world of capitalism and a free market economy, which works perfectly well if you let it. But governments inherently try to get involved and manipulate things. And whenever you manipulate a natural science, the laws of economics, supply and demand, it's like the natural laws of nature. The sun is going to rise in the east and set in the west. Well, with economics and business, you have supply and demand. It's like a seesaw. As one goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa. So when you try to manipulate that, it causes, obviously problems, and then you have to build infrastructure around that to manage all those problems. It's just a giant, huge expense. But in any case, the world is the way it is, and we have to try to operate as best we can within that framework. So life is more fluid than what the world of academia sees. Life is much more fluid. Things in every situation is unique and dynamic. So when it comes to real estate, and I will fully admit, Terrie, one of my earlier challenges when I started building a portfolio was when things would go wrong. People couldn't pay their rent, or there was a tree fell on the house, things like that, and I would deal with them. In my mind, I would try to deal with from one viewpoint, which is profit and loss. I got to get this thing back up and running, because if I don't have a profit, I don't have a business. So, but I did learn through experiences. It took a long time and several big events to teach me that you can have guidelines. We definitely need guidelines, but each situation is unique. Every person is unique. But so within that construct, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about what it is you do. And I really appreciate you bringing in the logic and the theory and the principles of Buddhism. I've studied all 5 major religions, and Buddhism was the hardest one because there's not like one specific set of dogma. It's like it's not like Judaism or Christianity or the Gita or the Quran. It's that in Buddhism there's sources of information all over the place. So hey guys, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but I'm really interested to have you dig into that and share, because I think a lot of property owners probably go through that same kind of dilemma, balancing being a compassionate human being with a profitable business owner, So sorry to ramble.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I think what you're alluding to is that like life is really full of contradictions, and it's really a balancing act. And I mean, real estate gives us one particular window onto how to run that balancing act. And, maybe some of the, challenges that people typically encounter, like there are specific sort of silos of challenges that people encounter in real estate. And I think, in property management, you mentioned one, which is kind of the stress factor of like stuff going wrong and you not necessarily having the tools to deal with it. So, we had a little off-camera discussion before about flooding. There's also, major insurance claims, like when stuff goes wrong and you are facing major losses, but at the same time, you have to deal with the human aspect, because I mean, if you own a piece of equipment and a hurricane takes out the piece of equipment, that's one thing. When it takes out people's homes and makes their homes unlivable, and then maybe, sometimes the people who find themselves in that situation don't necessarily act in ways that you can understand immediately. And that then makes the whole thing like pretty complicated, right? So I think one thing is kind of crisis management. And I think this is a place where, if again, you're not very well mentally aligned and you're not able to zoom out from your own emotions, people run into trouble. And so before I move on to the next topic, maybe I can just kind of unpack that a little bit. Like, I think one aspect of mindfulness, which is basically like mental training, is to be able to work with your emotions. And unless you've had experience training your mind, it can be difficult to know what to do when you have overwhelming emotional reactions. And that might be, in the real estate context, it's more like stress, panic because something's not going the way that you want, or anger because the tenants are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they're doing something that's kind of counter to your objectives. And so the question is, when you have those like overwhelming negative emotion dumps, what do you do in the moment? Do you attack because that's like a manifestation of anger? Do you run away? Do you ignore? Or do you find a way to be able to take appropriate actions in specific situations? So, I mean, I think that's like one kind of silo, if you want. And then another one is really with, progress and making business decisions when we don't have all the data. And I think that's like something persistently, like if you are consistently leveling up your game, you will always be at that point of discomfort. And that goes from buying your first property to doing your first joint venture to raising capital to all of those things where, as you're moving up and scaling your business, there will be always times when you have to make stretch decisions, and it's the unknown unknowns. Or you're investing in a secondary market outside of where you're comfortable. So you have to set up a new team somewhere. And like every time you pick a stretch goal, you have to have that experience of taking a step out into the unknown. And then how do you handle that? And there's managing fear, but fear is there to protect you. So you can't totally ignore your fear reactions. You have to be able to tune into the relevant information and then assess the risk based on, okay, let me take as much guesswork out of this as I can. And then at some point, I have to just take mitigated leaps. And so I'm going to take those mitigated leaps and understand that I'm not going to be able to solve all of tomorrow's problems today. I have to have confidence in my capacity that tomorrow I'm going to be able to confront those problems. And so there's really the methodology to be able to process the unknown and like not be, have magical thinking about it, because I think there's two tendencies, right? Like one tendency is to like shut down and stay in the comfort zone. And the other one is to be like, I can do anything and I'm just going to take any risk. And like, you have to fail forward. So let me just go forward no matter what. And I think that's also a bit problematic because there's a certain amount of due diligence you need to do. And if you blindly throw yourself out into deep water and don't think, what's my exit strategy, you can end up in a lot of trouble. So it's really to like, balance education with, at sometimes you have to just do it. And at sometimes you have to stop and think and educate yourself. And like, really it's by training your mind with mindfulness techniques that you're able to just take the emotional noise out of the way. You're able to understand, how does my mind work and where is it serving me? Where is it hurting me? And when it's hurting me, how can I turn the volume down on that? So I don't know if that's answering your question.
Oh, absolutely. I run a large team of agents we call investor agents all over North America. And one of the things I call it teaching and preaching is, you mentioned it perfect. It says perfect. You don't always have all the data. So I have this sort of a formula. I call it upside potential versus downside risk. And the way you determine the upside potential, downside risk is by education, number one. So this is the formula for success. The right education plus the right information plus right action leads to success. So what's interesting is the right education shows you how to find and use the right information, and those two together will lead to right action. So that way you can, as much as possible, because you very rarely have all the facts, but you're trying to gather as much as you can, and then do that. Look at that ratio. And what it does is increases your odds of success. I know in my beginning years, I was so successful, I thought, my gosh, I've got the magic touch. I would just go out there and just start buying stuff left and right. And that's when the mistakes started to occur. So that part of being mindful is absolutely critical. It's just, entrepreneurs, we're driven. I mean, we're ambitious, and we do want to, by nature, we're typically decisive. But if you can temper that with being mindful, I think, folks, you'll find yourself making better decisions. It's better to buy, I would say, 10 quality properties with, based on a formula like that, than buy, 100 just kind of winging it and guessing it, because there's nothing worse than starting off with a bad deal. The cool thing about real estate, though, is it's very forgiving as commodities go. It's not like buying stock in a company where if the company goes down, there's not a thing you can do about it. Your options are get in and get out. Real estate, you can make improvements. You can correct the physical building. You can add on. You can change tenants, things like that. But why not increase your odds from the outset? By being mindful. So am I on the right track as far as that particular silo? Yeah. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast after I invite you to Monday Night Live. Every Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, I teach a class without fail for you on subjects ranging from flipping to buying rentals, managing rentals, wholesaling, commercial, creative purchasing techniques, analyzing properties, identifying properties, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of subjects. And if you are a licensee, if you have a real estate license, you should definitely tap in, because there are a lot of investor agents also in the class. Many of them are on the global investor agent team. So you can learn from them, as well as from me, how to actually work with investors correctly and profitably. All right, we'll see you Monday night. The link is in the show notes. Go ahead and register. We'll get right to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
No, I think so. I think, one of the other things that applies to real estate, but it applies to like many spheres of life, is I think, people, and I include myself in that. I'm going to say people out there, myself included. I think we have this capacity to, I don't want to say lie to ourselves. It's too strong of a word, but like maybe self-deception is a better word. Yeah. And it's that we want things to be a certain way. And as a result, we don't necessarily process reality properly, and I think like in business thinking, like if I look at right now, I mean, in the US, I think you guys are in a bit of a downswing of the cycle. Us in Canada, we're in a major downswing. Yeah. And, anybody who like pulls up economic data and understands that like these are cycles. Yes, they're very long cycles. Like the real estate cycle is, I think it's an average of 19 years. So if you're working today, chances are you didn't see the last downswing. But like for the last 5 years in Montreal, like you could, what's the expression? You could be born on third base and think you hit a triple. Like basically, like my dog could make successful transactions because we were in such a good position in the market cycle that you can't make a mistake. Well, now all of a sudden we're going to see like, okay, things are a little bit more difficult, and you are actually going to have to like really work hard to make things happen. And, I think this is like where people, again, I want to use the word self-deceptive, like everybody wants to have abs when they go to the beach, but very few people are willing to make the sacrifices it takes to have that. So like lots of people sitting there with their goals. My top 5 goal is, this year I'm going to lose 20 pounds. I'm going to do this. But are you really willing to make the sacrifices and take the lifestyle hits that you're going to have to assume in order to make that goal happen? And I think in real estate, it's really a very similar thing, because wherever you are, whether you're starting out and you're 25 and you have no down payment money, or whether you're 45 or 55 and you have to make some major course corrections, like, you're going to have to take a lifestyle hit. And if that lifestyle hit is foregoing gratification on material things because you need down payment money, if it's living in a neighborhood you don't want to live in, if it's time constraints that you're going to have to get up at 6:30 in the morning before the kids are up to educate yourself, like you don't get to succeed at things that are difficult unless you make some sacrifices. And I think that's where like, sometimes like Instagram feeds are lying to us, right? Like that they make things look easy because you just see the success moments, but you don't see all of the hard work that people have to put in to get there. And maybe also us as podcasters and, people who talk in public, I think it's our responsibility to make it clear that like, yes, you have to make good decisions. Yes, there are great gains to be made in real estate, but like, you do also have to be realistic about like, what am I going to have to give in order to get those gains? And again, I bring up mindfulness, but like, one of the aspects of mindfulness is like, it's basically a way of looking at things that won't allow you to lie to yourself, won't allow you to hide from yourself. And so sometimes it's not necessarily data that you want to have. It's not necessarily that you want to see it, but unless you see things the way they are, you have no power to act on them because you'll be acting on a lie. And if you lie to yourself, it's the worst thing possible.
Yeah, I agree. I liken it to the principle of being present in the present moment, because really the past is there to learn from. You can't change the past, and the future is there to experience when it arrives. But right now, the facts that we have most relevant are the facts in the present moment. So, that was a real struggle for me because, being an entrepreneur and my other character traits that I've learned about myself is I do tend to be, I'm a dreamer, forward thinking. I'm always looking ahead. So I really, I had this mantra for myself is keep one eye on today and one eye on tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's fun to look forward and dream about the trip around the world, and all, the beautiful home on the beach. All that's great. And I appreciate those things. But the reality is the power is in the present moment. And so are the facts. You have to make decisions based on what you actually do know, factually speaking. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, that is a struggle. And so are there exercises, like how does someone arrive at this? If you don't mind, I know there's probably an entire, set of learning related to this answer to this question. But as much as you're able to, maybe give us some tidbits on that,
I did write a book on this.
Cool. All right.
So I wrote the book called Mindful Landlord, and basically half the book is going through some of those mindfulness strategies that you can use to train your mind specifically with relevance to real estate. But I'll give you a one very easy one that I think people can listen to this interview and walk away with. So one of the things that we learn in mindfulness training is that your thoughts, you are not your thoughts. Okay. And so we refer to something called monkey mind, where your mind has this tendency to always be chattering. It's like the radio. There always has to be a soundtrack playing, and that soundtrack will be whatever the weather cycle happens to be. So if you wake up and you're in a good mood, then you're going to be, daydreaming about the future vacation, thinking about your loved ones, like in this kind of positive space where your mind jumps from one branch to another like a monkey. And if you're on a kind of a more negative spiral, you can be, going from one negative thought to the next. I had this fight and I didn't enjoy this. And now it's going to be bad and it's going to ruin this. And it's like your mind is constantly chattering away, but you don't have to identify with the chatter. And in mindfulness training, we have this thing called watching the thinker, which means that there are actually different processes of consciousness that are going on in my mind at any time. There is this sensation of pure presence, which is always there and I can always come back to. And then there's the blah, blah, blah of my mind. Yeah. And I can learn to tune in and tune out of my thoughts at will. And then you can, practice this in either sitting meditation, or you can even do it as you're kind of going through life. Like you can think, okay, I'm going to now observe my mind thinking these thoughts. But who is the thing that's observing? Yeah. And if you learn to identify with the thing that observes as opposed to the thoughts, like, sure, sometimes you need thinking, right? Like if I want to make a decision, which building am I going to buy, or how am I going to prepare my file for, tenancy court? Obviously I need my thinking mind. But if at any time those thoughts become negative, or if there's a lot of like negative emotion in the air, I can just become the watcher again. And zoom out and always find that experience of pure presence, which is like, it's very calming and it's very grounding. So in it, like that's just one example, one little slice of something you can use. Yeah. It's you and I'm certain have had some similar training in the past and coaching into this. So one of the things I came up with on my own is when I'm trying to explain to someone else, really that you do have you have a higher self, higher level of consciousness, and sometimes people call it your spiritual self. So what I came up with is this. Actually came up with this on the fly. I was speaking with somebody who wanted to work with me, and we were talking about this subject. And I said, look, if you think about it right now, as you and I are having a conversation, I'm speaking, you're controlling your mind enough to listen to what I'm saying, compile the information and formulate a response. You said, yeah, I agree with that. I said, great. Who is the you that's doing all of that controlling?
And then he was like, whoa, I never had anybody ask me that before. And it's, if you think about it, we find ourselves doing that. Some people call it self-chatter or talking to yourself, but the reality is it is real and it's there. And I have a morning ritual I go through every single day to get in that state. And it doesn't mean that I don't have problems throughout the day, flat tires, things like that, children get sick and so forth. But the reality is that doesn't define me. Those circumstances don't define me. They're simply circumstances, and my life is, I see it as a beautiful thing, and I'm happy. And, you really learn to be grateful for everything in life, including the things that you may have previously considered, bad things. There's something always comes out of it, but I appreciate you saying that, because hopefully that just grabbed a lot of people by their head and realized, wait a second, I've always thought this, and now I have evidence.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think you mentioned gratitude, and I think like if you like want to have another understanding of an operation of the way the mind works, is that like us as human beings, we're constantly toggling between open, shut down, open, shut down. And when we meet something that, scares us, we kind of close in on ourselves. When we work from the energy of like love and growth, we are more open. And so if you want to flip the switch on that, there are specific ways to flip the switch on that. And gratitude is one of those. So if you want to get out of this, like, fearful, closed down kind of mindset, just stop, list 5 things, 10 things you're grateful for, and you will see it's incompatible with being shut down.
Yeah.
And so again, this is like a very powerful tool. Like, there are different mindfulness techniques. That's another one, is to learn how to, apply gratitude to flip the switch on your mind. Because at any time, like as humans, we just tend to like focus a lot more on lack. And then lack brings this energy of shutting down, fearfulness. I don't have enough. And it makes me like this closed, like a walnut almost. Whereas if you want to be able to expand, learning to practice gratitude, and like, it sounds like, sort of premeditated, but it actually works. Like if you just, I feel sometimes when I get like that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to just like stop and really put my energy on 5 things that are unrelated to anything I'm doing that I'm grateful for. And when I come back to whatever was frustrating me, it's with a completely different energy. And so it's like by learning to kind of manipulate what your mind's doing, you're really able to just get more out of it, because you are more effective when you're in an open state than when you're in a shut down state. So learn to flip the switch on that. Yeah,
that is so cool. I really appreciate this. I think everybody right now is like probably either pulled over or like, turn off their phone and thinking, hey, this is the kind of thing I needed to hear. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, I know we're going to get short on time here in a bit, but do you have like a ritual that you go through every day to prepare yourself, like a morning ritual? Or is like, when is the best time to practice this? I know like maybe it's throughout the day as circumstances arise, but if you wouldn't mind sharing a little light on that, that would be awesome too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think like, as I was like kind of transforming myself through this, like now I would love to say that I'm, so diligent that I do 15 minutes of sitting meditation every morning and every evening. I can't, claim that I do that. Right. Yeah. But at the time when I was setting this up for myself, I was very diligent about that. And, like sitting meditation is really a very, very good tool. And I would almost say indispensable on the path to doing that. Because this ability to observe your mind, like now I'm able to catch myself in patterns whenever I start spinning out, because I trained myself already. It's like, I don't know, all my metaphors are exercise metaphors, but it's like, at the beginning when I'm trying to learn how to weightlift properly, I have to really coordinate, like, and I'm squatting, are my hips aligned properly? Am I over my knees? Like once I go through that learning process, now I can always just snap myself back because I already learned it. Okay. So, I do train every day. I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu or like weight training, yoga. And like, for me, that is really a time when I'm in flow. And it's a way to center myself. Like for me, it's really like kind of like a mind body thing. And so, doing either yoga or jujitsu, like it's a very, you can't lie to yourself when you're in that state. And because you have this very direct contact with your body or with, someone else, if it's in the case of jujitsu, like it really kind of snaps me back to the physical reality that is like, there's no thinking in that space. So that's really what I use for. And for me, it's like, I don't compromise on my gym time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%. I've been doing this for years, and I've always had healthy habits. I played sports. I was playing soccer when I was 5 years old, and then baseball and football. Even in college, I played sports, and as an adult, I just carried those habits forward to daily exercise, and I do a calisthenics every single day. Very, very rarely do I actually take off. It's, if I have a 16-hour travel day, although I do keep my bands with me, so I can literally, it looks goofy, but I could be in an airport and do my bands, sit there at an airport chair, so I've actually meditated in airports before. And one time I came out of one and I was aware of everything around me. It's like when you meditate, guys, it's not like you're completely unconscious. I mean, you're aware of things that just you can hear somebody talking or a dog barking, but it doesn't confiscate your mind,
Yeah.
So I remember coming out of it, and this lady, she says, "Boy, you really had a good nap there." No, funny thing is, when I started, nobody was there. It was me and just the empty chairs. When I finished, it was completely full of people waiting for the plane. And I said, "Actually, I knew everything that was going on." And she looked at me like,
creepy.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure you remember Wayne Dyer. He passed away a few years ago, and I never met him, but I remember listening to him one time. He said he was able to meditate on planes. He could, not just in the airport, but on the plane with all the stuff going on and the announcements coming on and everything. And that takes practice. But I tell you what, guys, really think about this and make this part of your day and part of your life, because when you're an investor, real estate investor, even if you have other people manage your properties for you, you're still involved. I mean, you're the owner, and it ends up being like a human relations business. And these types of practices that Terrie's sharing with us, I'm not saying you won't have problems. You will still have challenges in life, but you'll be much better prepared, internally, your heart, your mind, where you come from, your mindset. So Terrie, I know we're getting closer, but any final thoughts? And also, how can we get a hold of you? You mentioned the book, the Mindful Landlord. Is that correct? Mindful Landlord?
Mindful Landlord. Yeah. So the book has a website. It's available on Amazon, or the website for the book is just mindfullandlord.com. The best way to connect with me is really through LinkedIn. That's the social media where I'm the most active. And it's just that you can find me, Terrie Schauer, just my name. And that will kind of like lead you into, I have a newsletter, I have a website, I have a podcast, but like, if you like this material, you'll get all the updates on my LinkedIn feed. Do I have something else to share? I mean,
yes.
I think like my mantra, or like something that maybe a lot of your listeners are already familiar with this, but like, progress is all about taking responsibility, and either you get results or you get excuses. You have to pick which one of those two things you want. And the only power I have to change anything is when I take ownership of it. Yes, the world is always going to throw curveballs. Like you said, there's no such thing as a path without problems. You can have an upward path with problems. You can have a downward path with the problems. You don't get to choose to not have problems. Mm-hmm. But taking responsibility for what your life looks like today, and getting real about what your life looks like today, and taking ownership of that, is the only platform from which you can move forward. So results or excuses. Absolutely.
That's perfectly said, and beautiful the way you did it too. And I agree. If you're not realistic about where you are right now, like I know you have your part of your mind that wants more. We all do, but being realistic, being practical, where you're just like you're running a race. Imagine you're running a 100-meter race. Of course you want to win, but you don't start off in the infield. You don't start off at the 20-meter mark. You start off at the same mark, where everybody else is. Only then can you have the right trajectory and the right plan to hit your goal. Because if you don't, the actions you're taking, you're probably not going to be in alignment with where you actually are, and that's a critical thing. So,
absolutely.
Anyways, hey, so guys, remember this: Terrie Schauer is Schauer. Okay, on LinkedIn. The book is called Mindful Landlord. Lots of ways to communicate with Terrie and contact her. And do you work with people privately too, Terrie, in your practice, coaching people?
Yeah, I do.
Awesome.
Yeah, I do. My podcast is in partnership with the Real Estate Investors Club, which is like a local organization in Montreal that offers coaching and training. So I do teach courses for them. I have a property management course on their platform, and then I do also offer private consulting through my my website. Yeah.
Awesome. And now, do you have followers in both Canada and the US too, and probably worldwide? The way podcasts are. Yeah. I found the same thing. We've got listeners in like 30 some odd countries, and I think, well, that's pretty awesome, So, in any case, well, listen, thank you again so much for sharing your time. This has been one of my favorite podcasts, and really because of you and the subject and what you bring to the table. I think for speak for a lot of people when I say thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And for everybody listening, please leave a great review. This is the currency of podcasts. We do this as like a public service, or you don't pay for it. But if you can leave a review, that's the way you can pay us. So leave a good review, because what makes the world, the podcast world, go around. And while you're out there, please go and visit globalinvestoragent.com, select an agent in your area. And if you don't see one, there's a thing you can click, learn more, get more information, and we'll help you out. So look forward to that, and we'll see you on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.